It's Hater Sensei, Grandmaster Chosen One, Ramsey Dewey, over here in Shanghai, China. I got a long email from our friend, the Magnorum, who sent me like 15 million questions, but I read them. He had a bunch of questions about fighting Southpaw versus Orthodox. He's a guy who likes to train Southpaw, and he wants data. He wants data. You've heard about the Southpaw advantage. It's commonly believed that Southpaws have an advantage, but he wants data. So let's give you some data. First of all, the idea that Southpaws have more success than Orthodox fighters comes from boxing. And in boxing, that is true. Experts say that left-handed fighters have a 54% chance of winning a boxing match. That is not actually true in the sport of mixed martial arts, however. So I looked up some data. There was I believe it was a German scientist, Dr. Florian Loffing of the University of Oldenburg in Germany, conducted a study between 2019 and 2014 where he collected the names. I'm reading this from towardsdatascience.com. He collected the names and handedness of the top 100 players for badminton, squash, tennis, table tennis, cricket, and baseball. His findings were that in male baseball, 30% were left-handed, in female, etc., 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 basically. So he collected data on these other sports, not MMA, to determine how much effect that the handedness had in these sports. So they used the same algorithms to compute success in mixed martial arts. And it's very interesting that we're not just looking at Orthodox versus Southpaw. There's more than that. There are far more stances at play in the sport of mixed martial arts. They broke it down into the following 5. Orthodox, Southpaw, switch, sometimes called switch hitters. That's people who routinely switch their stances. They're never married to one. Open stance, and sideways. If you're wondering what that means, sideways would be a side stance, a guy like Michael Venom Page. In this study of several thousand fighters, there was only one sideways stance fighter, maybe it was MVP, I don't know. But interestingly enough, it was not the Southpaws who came on top in this particular study. It was the switch stance guys in the sport of MMA. So MMA is importantly different than boxing. So being able to understand both sides, there's some merit to that. I'll often tell people, master one, be familiar with both. It's a similar thing with grappling on the ground, for example. We feel this obligation to train our attacks on both sides, and that's useful, that's important. But I would recommend master the attack on one side. Be familiar with both, because you might not have the perfect opportunity on the one side and you might on your less comfortable side. Anyway, be familiar with both sides. It's useful. How about that? So the Magnorum goes on to ask this. The conversation about Southpaws versus Orthodox fighters seems to be almost entirely striking-centric. What about grappling? I know that wrestlers stand power leg forward. Generally, they do. Why? Because that makes it easier to get the power leg in between your opponent's stance, to penetrate their stance, because you've got that leg that you want in between their legs, closer to their legs. That's what that is all about. However, it's important to note that as soon as you clinch up, as soon as you lock up with the other guy, you're no longer Southpaw or Orthodox. You are in a parallel stance, more or less. And if you're not, you're probably going to get a leg grabbed. So, on with the question. I notice a lot of fighters seem to spend a lot of time maneuvering around so they can choke with their dominant arm, or perhaps I'm misinterpreting it, but it does look like it to me. Probably. Makes sense. People tend to use their dominant arm to do their dominant attack. And if you're using the most dominant attack in mixed martial arts, the rear naked choke, most people tend to have their dominant arm around the neck. So, makes sense. So, general questions, not related to Southpaws and Orthodox. This is not just a Southpaw discussion here. We're discussing lots of stuff. You've mentioned Jack Dempsey's book, which I'm planning to read, but are there any other books on the theory, for lack of a better phrase, of fighting that you'd recommend? Is reading them actually useful? There probably are, but I can't think of any off the top of my head, because Actually, probably the most influential book to me about the theory of fighting, besides Jack Dempsey's Championship Fighting, was Mastering the Rubber Guard by Eddie Bravo. And it was extremely profound to me because it was the first time I picked up a martial arts book with pictures and how-to instructions on how to do various moves and techniques that was really well written, really well programmed, like a flow chart. I'd never seen anybody diagram martial arts technique like that before, from start to finish, as a whole system. So it's not just a how to do the rubber guard book, how to do these goofy looking grappling techniques books. It's really how to learn martial arts, how to convey the science of pedagogy, right? So there's a lot you can glean from that book in that sense. So next question, is the CTE worth it? If you really like fighting, how significantly should the risk of it and associated brain damage be weighed for someone thinking of taking up combat sports? CTE, everybody's worried about CTE right now. That is far from the only risk you're looking at in combat sports, man. My last fight left me with a broken skull. I still have a dent in my face, a soft spot right there, blind in one eye. Man, I've got a laundry list of injuries. Brain damage is a real thing. It does happen. It will happen if you get punched in the head, kicked in the head, slammed on your head, etc. But it is far from the only risk. Fighting is an inherently dangerous sport. You have to understand that. It's not just CTE. It's not just this conceptual thing that might happen in the future when you get old. It's something that will happen to you right now. So is it worth it? You have to decide that for yourself. Man, you have to decide that for yourself. Next question. What is the probability of the UFC going bare knuckle again? Probably zero, because there are far too many boxing commissioners with their hands in the cookie jar. And it was boxing commissioners who wrote the UFC rules in the first place. The New Jersey State Athletic Control Board wrote those rules, and because of them, they said, we need gloves or we're not going to make this legal. That's a boxing tradition. Most of the rules of the UFC are boxing traditions. No striking the back of the head, the neck, or the spine. That's a boxing tradition. Gloves. The fighters must wear gloves. That's a boxing tradition, etc. Will they take it out? Probably not. Joe Rogan has said that all it would take is for the UFC to listen to him. Well, sure, yeah. That's like saying, man, if I was the president of the world, if everybody would just listen to me, maybe we could have all my ideas instead of other people's ideas. Sure. Anyway, is there any possibility of them making it? Probably not. And is bare knuckle punching only boxing dysfunctional compared to traditional boxing? It's different. And traditional boxing is bare knuckle boxing. And not the bare knuckle boxing we have today with the wraps around the wrist and the metacarpals, like actual bare-handed, nothing on it, naked fist boxing. That's the tradition of pugilism, man. Gloves have only existed in the sport of boxing for less than 100 years. They were introduced about the year around the 1920s. Some fighters used them before then, but it was standardized around the 1920s. Around the time Jack Dempsey became world champion, man. And those gloves changed the sport. They allowed aggressive fighters like Jack Dempsey to play a high-risk, high-reward game and start headhunting with some very aggressive and wild punches that was simply not possible in the bare-knuckle days, where there was a lot of clinch fighting, which is no longer allowed, a lot of trapping, a lot of infighting, a lot of grab the guy and carefully redirect those arms and hit the soft spots in the body with the fists. So is it dysfunctional? No, it's just different. It's just a different thing. It's like comparing fighting with a sword to fighting with a stick. It's both fighting, both can kill you, but they'll kill you differently. Do you need gloves to train? Well, what are you training? Are you training judo? No. Are you training jiu-jitsu? No. Are you training boxing? Yes. Are you training for the sport of mixed martial arts? Yes. Are you training for some other combat sport that requires gloves? Then yes. Can be. What about the streets, Ramsey? You don't wear gloves on the streets. Can be glove. I hate the fact that I'm about to give you some street fighting advice, but if you want enough volume of punching to get any good at punching, it's generally a good idea to invest in a pair of gloves so you can get more punches in without skinning up your knuckles so much that you can't do it again the next day. So gloves are a great training tool. They're an excellent training tool. How would we expect MMA to change if the gloves were removed? Would we revert to old boxing stances? To old boxing stances? No. We would revert to new MMA stances, if you will. If you take out the gloves, we would see a lot more grappling, a lot more clinch fighting. Can spoilt white kids fight? Can spoilt white kids fight? Let's see where he's going with this. So this is kind of weird, but I've heard it a few times now over the internet and strangely in real life. It sounds kind of, well, racist. Okay. But it seems they've kind of got a point. It does seem that black people so drastically overrepresent basically... Am I going to regret reading this? Am I going to get banned from YouTube? He said racist and black people and white people in the same paragraph. Where are we going with this? Okay. Bite down on the mouth guard. Charge forward. Let's see what happens. Basically, all the ultra-famous boxers seem to be Ali, Tyson, Frazier, Foreman, Mayweather, etc., etc., and they do seem to represent disproportionately. What is this? Is there something genetic at play? Or is it just that they are statistically more likely to live harder, more difficult lives? So, for example, Ali grew up in segregation, and Francis Ngannou had to cross the Sahara to even learn to fight, which makes them better fighters. Similarly, is it possible for somebody who has a mostly easy upbringing to become a competent fighter? Because basically all the top martial artists I'm aware of seem to have had some kind of really difficult upbringing, or at least were bullied for a bit when they were a kid. Is this kind of experience necessary to develop the mental toughness required for combat sports, or do such people just overrepresent in combat sports? I know it sounds kind of absurd, but I do wonder. Also, is the whole white kids can't fight thing a big thing in combat sports and martial arts, or did I just run into the wrong people? It's kind of off-putting. Okay. Race and combat sports. Okay. Can white kids fight? Yes, white people can learn how to fight. Black people can learn how to fight. People of different colors can learn how to fight. The color of your skin is not a reflection of your potential as a fighter. And, yeah, man, take a look at Ukrainian boxers. There are a lot of great Ukrainian boxers. And if you look at the great boxers coming out of Ukraine, guess what? They're Ukrainian. Over here in China, all the great Chinese fighters are, wait for it, Chinese. In Mexico, all the great Mexican boxers are Mexican. So something about the overwhelming majority of the demographic involved in said sport produces the overwhelming majority of the demographic involved in said sport. So I don't know where you live. Maybe you live in a place with a lot of African Americans, and therefore there is a disproportionate number of African American boxers, fighters, etc. So does that mean white people can't fight? No, it's... I'll tell you a little story. When I first came here to China and I started fighting here, I heard a lot of Chinese people tell me, white people are so good at fighting. White people are so athletic. White people are so strong. White people are so genetically gifted. And these are words I never really heard in the United States, because in the United States, there's often a message of white people, boo, boo. And over here in China, the white privilege is real, yo. But it's very interesting seeing different cultures' views of different cultures. So the way white people are viewed in America, the way white people are viewed in China, radically different. They're generally viewed in a positive light here, as opposed to in the U.S., where there's, I don't know, there's There's all kinds of racial divides set up in the U.S. There always have been. And the powers that be and profit from it seem to want this to persist forever and ever and ever. And this question is a reflection and a microcosm of that, of a much greater issue, a much more serious issue. So I hate the fact that you feel the need to ask that question. Of course you can learn how to fight if you're white or brown or yellow or whatever your color is. And before you jump on me and say, yellow, do you know what the Chinese call themselves? Their own color? The Han Chinese, Huang Seda. That means yellow. That means yellow. Their words, not mine. Anyway, just saying. So, whatever your color is, you can learn how to fight. Can you learn how to fight if you're a rich, spoiled kid? If you have unlimited resources at your disposal, let's look at Jake Paul for a minute. I'm not calling him a rich, spoiled kid. He's rich, that's for sure. He made a lot of money through his endeavors and his efforts, his YouTube platform, etc., etc. Man's very rich. And in the last few years, he's become pretty good at boxing. With unlimited resources and unlimited time at your disposal, with the ability to hire the best coaches, get the best training partners, put yourself in the best training situation, you can get pretty good pretty fast, especially if you're already an athletic, strong young man like Jake Paul is. Now, we can all say, hey, Ramsey, but Jake Paul is not one of the boxing greats. He's never actually boxed a boxer before. So far, he's fought retired MMA fighters. Yeah, that's true. That's true. He has acquired a certain level of skill, which he has essentially paid for. But, yeah, he's not one of the boxing greats. Time will tell. Maybe he will become one of the boxing greats. I don't know. Maybe not. But he's a white kid who learned how to fight, and he has money, so it can be done, believe it or not. Having money is not a disadvantage. As far as fight training goes, it's actually a big advantage to have resources at your disposal. Of course, if you have nothing, if you are literally hungry, this is what pushes a lot of people into combat sports. Why did I start fighting? Financial necessity. I was working 3 jobs at the time, and I had bills stacking up, and I just needed a little extra money to make it, to pay some medical bills, So what did I do? I started fighting for an extra paycheck. It's such a common trope in the combat sports world. People struggling, and so they fight to make a little extra on the side while they're still working. Man. And a lot of these guys get really motivated, really hungry, and they're like, man, I hate working at the factory. I would rather punch people in the face for a living, man. It seems like a fair trade-off to me. And some of those people get very motivated, some not so much. So it's understandable that people who grow up in really rough situations will fight tooth and nail to get out of that situation. I had a conversation with my older brother many years ago. We both grew up kind of poor by American standards. Our mother was a foreign emigrant, single mother of 7 children. We used to glean fields for food. Man, times were tough back then. And my older brother, as an adult, he became a statistician. He got a really nice job, started making a lot of money. And I sat down and talked with him, and he said, I don't think I could ever go back to being poor. I wouldn't allow myself to do that. Essentially, he said he would fight to not go back there in that hole of poverty. Not physically fight, but fight as in claw his way up as far as earning potential goes. Anyway, next question. How soon, how good do you have to be before you can spar? You have various videos where you discuss how you think it's disgusting that people who have no idea how to fight each other. How good do you have to be before it's not? Sparring is not fighting. If you think sparring is fighting, you're definitely not ready to spar. People who don't know how to fight being thrown into the ring or the cage for a full contact fight take for example the Creator Clash that they did on YouTube, where they took these unwitting fellows who didn't know how to fight and were not prepared to intelligently defend themselves, and just took an unnecessary, disgusting amount of damage. And a lot of people brushed it off like, oh, it's for charity, they're grown adults, they made an informed decision. No, they didn't. You don't make an informed decision until you know what you're getting yourself into, and if you've never fought, if you don't know how to intelligently defend yourself, you're not capable of making an informed decision. But that's not sparring. Sparring is not fighting. You should not be leaving a sparring session injured and unable to do it again the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next. You should spar at a rate at which you can do it every day, multiple times a day if necessary. Spar with your training partners like they're babies, like they're your own precious children that you wouldn't dare hurt. Get really technical. Get really technical. Why? Because that's when you get better. I spar with brand new students on day one, and a lot of people throw their hands up in the air. You can't do that, because they're picturing a fight. They think I'm beating up the new students on day one. No, I'm teaching them on day one. I'm teaching them how to fight on day one. They are taking zero injury. None. None whatsoever. Look at this clip. This is a sparring session with a brand new student on his very first day. He showed up. I said, we're going to spar. He looked at me all crazy like I was going to beat him up. I told him, no, look, I'm not going to hurt you. You're going to leave 100% intact, not a bruise, not a scratch on you. He said, okay, this is what happened. Look at what's going on. We're getting technical. I'm touching him with the gloves. I'm bringing my foot right up to the skin. Zero damage, zero impact, zero power, 100% technique. That's how you should spar. That's how you should spar, and everybody should do it on day one. Day one. And if you're not, that's disgusting. If you got this far, congratulations. We won! Sweet. And thank you for bothering to read them. My apologies if any of them are stupid. No stupid questions, man. No stupid questions. Actually, there are stupid questions, but these weren't them. If you have stupid questions, leave them in the comments down below. I would love to make a video answering stupid questions. Let's do it. Leave me your stupidest question in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.